Let me welcome Phineas Mtota to our first presenter today. Phineas is the Executive for Economic and Market Regulation at ECB in Namibia. He has at times acted as Chief Executive Officer for ECB, I think on 2 occasions, from June 2021 to January 2022, and from November to March 2023. Up to the period 2020, Phineas served as the chairperson of the Economic Regulation Committee of the Regional Electricity Regulation Association of Southern Africa, RERA, which is based in Namibia. With over 20 years of experience in electricity regulation, Phineas has profound experience in the Namibian and Southern African electricity markets. In his current role, he is responsible for ensuring the financial and economic sustainability of the Namibia electricity supply industry through effective economic regulation. His main duties including implementing the electricity market model, applying appropriate tariffs, methodologies, and determining electricity tariffs for generation, including for IPPs. You may all be aware that Namibia introduced a market model called the single buyer model. And a key part of Phineas' role is to ensure the operational functionality of the MSB or single buyer model, as it is known, and to maintain cost-reflective electricity tariffs and ensure that tariffs cover utility operational and capital costs while remaining affordable to the end consumers. So we have quite some good experience in Phineas. I think he will be able to share with us today. He has been instrumental in developing numerous rules and regulations for Namibia electricity supply industries, including the modified single buyer model that I referred to earlier on, the rules, the economic rules, metering rules, reseller rules, national connection charge policies, and a host of number of other rules that he has developed. He holds a Bachelor of Accounting degree from the University of Namibia and an honors degree in commerce with a focus on energy studies from University of Johannesburg, UJ, and an executive development program certificate from Stellenbosch. Currently is pursuing a master's of management in energy leadership at WITS. Phineas has quite a passion for contributing to the advancement of his country, and he continues to be a driving force in shaping Namibia's energy landscape and fostering sustainable development. Phineas, you're welcome to take over.
Thank you, Lion. Thank you, colleagues. And first, I want to convey my appreciation to Africa GreenCo for making this platform available for us to engage. I think it is important that most of these things are happening around. They will be happening in all of our countries. So the more we share ideas, I think the better it is for us to actually just ensure that we effectively and do not repeat what our colleagues have done. So I have prepared some slides for the purpose of our discussion today. While the slides are loading, I just also want to thank the viewers or the people that have logged on to listen to us and also share their experience with us, so that at the end of the day, I think it is important that we always remember about the people who do not have access to electricity or are unable to afford electricity. And Lion, you mentioned that one of our issues is trying to, as regulators, we are trying to ensure effective regulations. In my view, that regulation should not be an impediment and it should be an enabler. So this is what we have been trying to do. I have prepared these slides in the context of the modified single buyer market model in Namibia. when we are looking at how do we then ensure or at least promote the implementation or the development of the industry with IPPs. I think from where we came from is that we wanted to make sure that the market that we are operating in is actually conducive. And that's what I'm going to take you through and how we came up with a modified single buyer and how it operates, and then just give you a bit of status in terms of where we are now. As I've indicated, as also Lion have already made the introduction, I work for the Electricity Control Board. These items, I think you can get the slides later on in terms of what is our mandate. But what I want then to perhaps emphasize here is that one of our mandate is to provide private sector investment in the electricity industry. So how do we then promote that private sector? Is then creating the necessary tools and making sure that the industry is viable. What are our core regulatory areas? Licensing, economic regulations, that is my focus area, tariff setting and financial viability, and then we also do technical regulations. Exactly like most of the regulators around the region, those are our responsibilities because electricity somehow finds itself to be a product that has to be regulated, perhaps not power itself, perhaps some of the infrastructures that we are having. How did we evolve? The market evolution from a single buyer to a modified single buyer. So this is where we, as most of the countries, where we move from a single buyer market model to a modified single buyer. But just to give you context and also to understand Namibia in terms of the population, the land size, it gives you an indication that in as much as Namibia is a large place, 820,000 square kilometers, we only have about 3.1 million people staying in Namibia. You can see how vast it is. We have our maximum installed capacity is about 715 megawatts, of which about 500 is done by the national utility. We have managed to attract 22 IPPs in renewable that are all operating, mainly solar PV and wind. We have about 72 megawatts of installed net metering. If you look at the net metering installation is about 10% of the installed capacity, which is also a result of net metering rules that we have developed about 8 to 9 years ago. So our maximum demand hovers around 640 megawatts. So it's a very small system comparing to a number of countries in the region. But I think also the beauty about small market is also that you can actually implement a lot of other things much quicker. And those that have bigger markets can actually also then pick up in terms of whether those things are working or not. So as I've said, we move from a single buyer market model, which was adopted in 2000. But in 2019, that is when we moved into the modified single buyer market model. So a lot of other countries have also been single buyer market models, but I see that there is an evolution of moving into a bit of competitive markets around the region. Why did we change? There was a top-down approach from a policy driver perspective where government, or from a policy perspective where government was saying that tariffs are becoming unaffordable. This is specifically because Namibia took a decision for the tariffs to be cost reflective by 2015, which was then reached. But there is a very large group of people that are saying that tariffs are not cost reflective. And there's a host of other policy items that actually led us to change from a single buyer market to a modified single buyer. We wanted to encourage IPPs. We wanted to increase competition. We also wanted to reduce the need for government financial support whether it's in equity or loans or guarantees for new generation capacity. We also wanted to increase access, and importantly, we wanted to ensure that lights remains on. One of the issues is that Namibia is still a net importer. We import at times about 60% of our energy from the region. The market driver, one of the bottom-up driver why we had to change is because the market was also then starting to push up, because the tariffs were probably not set right, and that's why you will find that a person will be then procuring energy that is energy only, but is in comparison to energy and other services that the utilities are then providing. So which makes it much more difficult or easier for people then to compare and conclude that the energy that they are buying from the utilities were expensive. What we also then realize is that if we are not going to do anything, we are going to have issues of our utilities death spiral, where then the utilities will start losing sales and revenue because customers will then perhaps be using alternatives and so forth. So those are some of the issues why we then did what we had to do. We had options, of course, in terms of the markets that we are going to implement. The monopoly was not the desired one. The single buyer was not the desired one. The independent system market and transmission operator, in the context of our market, we noted that it was a bit small, and then that's why we went into a modified single buyer, which is much more of a phased-in approach. And of course, competition is very costly, and if we were going to do nothing, then we are going to have the issues of the utility death spiral. And that's how, and that's when we landed at the modified single buyer. In terms of how it works is such that it allows transmission customers, everybody that is connected to a transmission network, and all that are connected to a distribution network at 1 MV and above are able to buy up to 30% of their energy from an IPP elsewhere. So why the phased-in approach and the limit of the 30% energy is because we wanted also to ensure that we do not have stranded contracts that has already been in place. So the idea is that as we unwind the contracts, import contracts and so forth, then we start increasing. This is at the local level. However, government then thought that, of course, if you want to put up an IPP within the country for the purpose of exporting, although we are importing, we will allow you to export immediately. Because why? You might not be ready to procure your energy at that point in time. Perhaps it's not within the integrated resource plan and the procurement processes, and you want to develop your project. You can imagine a 200 megawatt solar PV project for Namibia. You might need Nampower to offtake it, but then because of procurement and then integrated resource plans and so forth, it might not be needed at that point in time. So government said, if you want to do your 200 for the Southern Africa Power Pool, by all means. And that is how we've also then seen the emergence of IPPs for export purposes. I think I'm not going to go into why do we need it. I think I've also then mentioned it earlier on in terms of why top-down and bottom-up. But basically is to allow more local generation capacity and to address issues of monopoly and so forth. But also to ensure that Namibia becomes more energy self-sufficient. Where are we now? The block represent a number of activities that we have done. We have the rules, we have the wheeling framework and the balancing framework. I think that is the most important one that I can share with you. But all the other items we have already done. And why I'm saying this, it is important when markets are being sort of relooked at to bring in new investment, so that some of these things are dealt with at the beginning, so that you take away the confusion and the uncertainty in the market. In terms of the market structure, I think also maybe I will move a bit quicker on this one. It's just that previously we only had the black blocks. What it means is that this is the existing. The dotted lines are the new arrangements, where we then created what we call eligible sellers and contestable customers. These two can actually transact without the single buyer, or in this case, the modified single buyer in manpower. So an IPP on this side can actually transact with a contestable customer on this side, enter into a power purchase agreement. It does not need to be embedded. It can be willed, and then they can conclude on their transaction. It does not only mean it's a transmission customer, it can also be a distribution connected customer. Traders are also then allowed to engage between off-takers who are contestable, seen as contestable customers, and also eligible sellers. So that is how we sort of then opened up the market. Then one of the questions that we normally get is that if you are then importing, how do you then ensure that you are not perhaps exporting some of your best resources, maybe good resources and so forth? But we wanted the market to be certain in terms of what is going to happen. In the rules, we have what we call an export callback, whereby projects that have been developed for export purposes, where we can call back that energy if needed, and there is a mechanism how it's being done. But of course, in terms of commercial terms, the generator should not be worse off. So those are some of the issues that we've also included. Where we are now is that I think maybe I must go to this one. How we faced in the market, phase 1A and B. We are now in phase 1B. We are still at 30%. What is happening in phase 1B is just that we've allowed distribution connected customers to also then participate. Exporters are allowed. You could see here that we are saying no size limit. We could allow up to 1,000 megawatts, but then we later on realized that there are some limitations in terms of transmission cross interconnectors, where Namibia is connected to South Africa and Zambia, and there are some limitations. So now what we are doing is that we have allowed those ones that have been issued with licenses to take up the allocated about 120 megawatts capacity on the line, while we are then making sure that the interconnectors, we study how much more can we actually allow. The rules, here what I want to emphasize is the issue of the rules, that we have market rules that were promulgated in 2022. The rules are speaking of who qualifies, how do we manage capacity on the network, how do we manage bilateral trading nominations, and how settlements are done. But these rules are then accompanied or supported by the balancing framework and the wheeling framework. The balancing framework basically speaks as to how do we deal with real-time adjustments for IPPs that are then nominating and delivering, and then delivering the power on a nominated basis, so that the system operator is also not out of pocket and they are also aware of what is going to happen. So these are some of the important tools that the market must also have when they are actually going into these bilateral or competitive discussions. The wheeling framework, all what we are saying is that an eligible seller does not need to be, does not only need to sell to a contestable customer behind the meter. This eligible seller, for instance, in this example, can sell to the market operator, they can sell to this contestable customer, they can sell to a distribution customer, they can even export. So the idea is that you needed to have a willing framework that speaks in terms of what costs are applicable to who, because I think in some of the cases we've realized that the costs are being mixed up, and that's why we then had to come up with a willing framework. Tariff unbundling is one of the most important things that you do not want customers to escape certain costs of services that they are receiving from the network. So the stakeholders, the IPPs, the contestable customers, the eligible sellers must understand what costs are then going to be applicable to them while being provided for specific services, network services, for instance, ancillary services and so forth. And if the tariffs are not unbundled, then what we are going to have is that you are going to have stakeholders taking decisions on information that is not complete. In terms of where we are now is that this is now specifically speaking to the local market. The 30% is a representative of about 643 megawatts that could be taken up in solar PV equivalent. So that is the capacity that is allowed, or that is the potential that is there for everybody in the country to take up in terms of those that are connected to the transmission. We have seen that only 183 megawatts have been licensed, and the unlicensed comes to about 460, if I'm not mistaken. I think I must just check the numbers here, 500. So there are 461 for the local market and the existing ones. And then the operational, we only have about 15 megawatts. So if you look at the 15 megawatts in the context of Namibia in terms of the size, perhaps it's still small, but this is now moving whereby we are having about 93 which are under construction. So in the next 2 years, we expect the ones that are not licensed to be licensed and then also move into construction. What we are saying is that there is a slow movement. However, some of these transactions will take place, will take a bit of while, because again, the financiers and the developers and all the stakeholders are only starting to get used to some of these things. But we are very optimistic in terms of how the market is going to evolve. We are saying that local IPPs have taken up. We see that a lot are now reaching financial close. Some are constructing. Some are going to start construction next year and so forth. That is just an indication that there is a competitive tariff and potential for diversification in the energy mix to incorporate renewable energies. Licensed for export, we have licensed about 11 IPPs going, and about and what I want to mention here is that we have one that is actually under construction, and this IPP is specifically on a merchant basis, and it's going to export power into the Southern Africa power pool, and it is slated to reach COD by Q3 of 2025. We have issued export licenses, 13 of them. We have issued traders license, 4 of them. This is also just an indication of the movement. But issuing licenses and a lot of licenses does not necessarily reflect to the reality. But our reality is in the under construction that we are seeing there. The merchant business is one of them that have created a lot of interest due to our market, which is small. A number of investors wants to export. So we are confident that we are going to get more. Those that are licensed, they will start their construction also soon. As I've indicated, we have some constraints on the line, but on the interconnectors, but those who are going to be sorted out soon. the outlook on the Namibian ESI is that we have 643 megawatt solar PV equivalent that is available. The modified single buyer creates more opportunities for competition, not only for Namibia, but also for the regional market. This will give us chance of building more local generation. What we want to emphasize is that customers who choose to generate own electricity will have to pay to utilize the distribution network. They have to pay network access fees, use of system charges, and reliability fees. In terms of the IRP, when we are talking of the IRP, we do have what we call a National Integrated Resource Plan. We are now waiting for the minister to do a ministerial determination in the maybe in the next month or so, within the next month, where we are going to add probably almost about 330 megawatts of solar PV, which is going to be a combination of IPP and EPC by NamPower. Of course, the IRP will then also take into consideration what is already licensed and what is allocated to be done by the private sector in the MSB, because then that is going to be bilateral transactions. So, colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I rushed through the presentation. I hope that I've covered items that you also wanted to hear from Namibia, but I am available for some questions and engagements. And once again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Phineas. There are some questions in the chat there, but while you scroll up that, I think you have answered some of the questions you have already addressed. You have addressed the question on Namibia's export capacity on the transmission interconnectors. The question was on whether Namibia has sufficient export capacity to encourage that massive investment in generation toward targeting the sub-market. I think you have addressed that. But could you also just talk to the response of the financiers to the move towards the modified single buyer model? Has there been an attitude shift in the financiers towards financing projects under the old structure and versus under the current modified single buyer model? What is the attitude of money outside there?
Yeah, thank you, Lion. I think when I mentioned that the uptake was very slow, it was because a lot of stakeholders were not perhaps comfortable, or they were not necessarily well aware of the market and how it was going to work. But what I want to confirm that the attitude of the financiers now is very positive, and they are not only looking at plans that are for local uptake. They are actually also now interested. Last week we had one of our local banks that visited a site where an IPP is intending to actually export. By visiting, they have done a number of studies, and they are now in the phases of probably taking a decision on that final investment decision. However, in terms of the shift, I can say that the financiers are also on board. We have about 3 or 4 that are concluded. This is bilateral transactions that are concluded, and that they are privately funded not by the off-taker themselves, because there is a bit of where you find that there is a large power user such as a mine, and then it is a parent company that is the one that is funding the plant. But we have about 4 or 5 that are completely funded by private financiers, which means that these PPAs are commercially viable and that the commercial entities, commercial financial entities have found it to be viable.
Thank you, Phineas. There is another question in the chat, which is who determines who can develop a plant in Namibia and what informs the decision to grant a license to a developer?
First, we have how the planning is done is that we have what we call the National Integrated Resource Plan, which looks at what demand Namibia needs. And then that is done in a consultative manner. And that is what then is procured at a national level for everyone. So the Minister of Mines and Energy, after now the NRP has been consulted, will then say, for the next 5 or 3 years, we are going to be constructing 300 megawatt solar PV. The 300 is going to be done, maybe 200 by IPPs, and then the rest is going to be done by NamPower on their balance sheet, and then the procurement is done. So that public determination is done via an integrated resource plan. Because we have opened up the market, now the other contestable customers can determine on their own when do they want to build their plants. So a mine or a distributor can then say, okay, fine, we are also going to take part, and then we are going to procure from an IPP. So that 30% is customer specific. And then the rest is then done at a much more broader level, at the ministerial level. So when the minister, through the IRP, the National Integrated Resource Plan, is then issuing what we call a determination, then he must also then take into consideration that there is an allocation of 30% that can be done separate from this public process. And for you to get a license, of course, if you are going to do a merchant plant, you indicate to the regulator that you are going to do a merchant plant. Are you going to trade on SAP? Yes. Or are you having a customer who is in Zambia? Yes. Then we need to see an indication from the off-taker. But what is important is just the off-taker. Who is your off-taker? You provide us with the information, and then we can then process the license.
Thank you so much. I think the other one is a comment which you have already explained the phases through which the market reforms are going. But this comment is saying MSB is too little, too late. Maybe just 1 second response to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so sure now in the context of too little, too late. But if you are looking at it in the context of Namibia, we do not think that it is too little, too late. MSB was probably one of the markets where, in the region, where we went into some sort of competitive generation space. So you can't just move into a competition space. There should be phases, and I think I've also indicated why we chose MSB other than maybe a competition or wholesale or maybe independent system operator and so forth. However, each country is unique and it have its own specifics. South Africa has just issued or passed a open access regulation where they've done some unbundling. Zambia have open access also on their own. I think each country is unique. So in Namibia, we do not think that it's too late. It's actually this is actually the right time. So if you are there and you want to invest and you want to then engage in a private off-taker, you are allowed to engage in Namibia. The balancing framework is there, the wheeling framework is there, and you are not necessarily only tied to sell to a national utility, because that has been the operations, the modus operandi for the past. some of our utilities are probably not financially viable. We also do not want to incumbent our national utilities just for everything, and which leads to government. So if there's an opportunity to do some certain things in a much more controlled and formalized way, why not?
Thank you so much, Phineas. I know you are rushing somewhere. I think it will be okay to say if there are viewers here who are particularly keen in moving into Namibia with their projects, they can reach out to you, and I think you can have conversations. Thank you so much for that very informative presentation.
Thank you, Lion, and thank you, colleagues, for the interactives. Yes, please, if there's any other issues, please, you can send me some, maybe an email or so. But as I said, these things are not same size fits all. We will assist each other so that what is happening in South Africa, we take, and then we tailor make it. What is happening in Namibia, I don't think one economy is too small for the others to learn from. We can all learn a thing or two from each other. I'll be online for a few minutes, so thank you once again, and yeah.
Thank you so much. If you are still online, you can go through the online comments and probably just respond to some of them online. Thank you. Let me move to Chris. Our next presenter is Chris Yeland. Chris Yeland is no stranger to the electricity sector. He obtained his Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from University of Natal sometime back in 1976. And he was the founder and managing director of EE Publishers, the publisher of Engineer IT, Energize, Vector, and Position IT magazines. And after 2019, when EE Publishers closed, Chris started a new company, EE Business Intelligence, to focus on important strategic issues facing the electricity, energy, and ICT sectors in South Africa and the region. In February 2020, Chris was appointed Associate Consultant for leading Financial Services and Capital Markets Research Group, Intellidex, and Energy Advisor to OUTA organization out Undoing Tax Abuse. Chris was the winner of the 2002 South African Bureau of Standards Media Award for exceptional contribution to increasing the awareness of standardization and related issues through the media. In 2003, he won a merit award in the energy category of the 2003 Siemens Profile Awards, recognizing journalistic contribution to excellence in the field of science and technology. In 2009, Chris won the South African National Energy Association Journalism Award for special efforts within the field of journalism to promote greater understanding of energy and its role in sustaining human endeavors. Chris is a fellow of the SAIEE, a senior member of IEEE USA, and a member of the IET UK. He also is also a registered chartered engineer with the Engineering Council in the UK. A lot of you might have received some communications from Chris. I have enjoyed communications that I've, publications that I've received from Chris over the past 3 years. Chris is here today to discuss with us, in particular, in South Africa space and in general, the SADC space. Chris, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Lion, for that introduction. And it's a great pleasure to be here. And a great pleasure, and thank you to Africa GreenCo for this wonderful opportunity and for facilitating the engagement. And it's an honor to engage with you and with colleagues from the region. A great honor indeed. Well, I'm going to be talking today about energy and electricity planning in South Africa, with an emphasis on the integrated resource plan for electricity. I'm just trying to change my next slide. Let's just make sure that this is changing. Right. To start off with a quick disclaimer, my work involves consulting, advisory, and advocacy services, and I need to disclose I am an associate consultant to Crutham, a financial services advisory company, and I also act as an energy advisor to the organization Undoing Tax Abuse, that's OUTA. And I must say up front, I do not purport to be an expert of any kind, but I am an engineer and I can understand some of the engineering techno speak, and I have an ability to convert this into a language that normal human beings can understand. And I spend a lot of my time on radio and TV doing just that. I must also declare that I assisted OUTA in preparing its comments for the draft Integrated Resource Plan 2023 for electricity, which is actually in process at the moment of undergoing further consultations and change, and hopefully will be gazetted as a final integrated resource plan for electricity in 2025, end of the first quarter. I think it's quite optimistic, but maybe it can be done. And you might know that this webinar was actually scheduled for last week, but because South Africa is in the midst of public engagements, stakeholder engagements, it was one of the reasons why this webinar, it was decided to hold it over to this week. So it is great. It's given me an opportunity to keep you informed of the latest developments that are taking place in South Africa, at least. And I do believe that South Africa is integral with the region, and what's good for our neighbors is good for South Africa, and what's good for South Africa is good for our neighbors, because ultimately it is a regional economy. As a quick overview, I'm going to be talking about the political landscape of energy in South Africa, and then on to the planning landscape, further detail on the integrated resource plan for electricity. Oh, sorry, before I do that, the integrated energy plan for South Africa and where it fits in the planning framework, and then moving on to the integrated resource plan for electricity in South Africa, and the changing roles of government and the private sector, and the concepts of the public-private partnerships that are starting to become more apparent. And lastly, the emerging pragmatic arrangements that are coming about, and putting to bed some of the old ideological arrangements for more practical and pragmatic solutions. So the government and private sector have to do, of course, the right thing for a long time, and this requires political will at the highest level. It requires economic growth to provide the necessary revenue, and the fiscus in a strong enough position to support all the ambitions of the country. And of course, it involves technology. So this presentation is focusing on electricity planning in South Africa, but it also covers other energy sources, including coal, oil, and diesel, nuclear, hydro, wind, solar, etc., all of which are used, not only in the wider energy framework, but also in the generation of electricity. So let's just start off with the political landscape in South Africa. Up to now, or up to about the middle of this year, we've had a department known as the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, the DMRE, and it has been responsible for mining and electricity and energy in its broadest context. But I believe there have been some conflicts of interests between the interests of mining and mineral resources on the one hand, and the interests of energy and electricity on the other. And sometimes they don't speak to a common sort of output, and there are strong coal interests within the mineral resources, and then in the energy sector there's a move to mitigate climate change and to diversify energy resources away from coal, and so these two parts of the DMRE were sometimes in conflict. And we had our elections in the middle of this year, and the seventh administration emerged without a clear majority in the ruling party, and we entered into a phase of coalition politics. And at that point, the president decided, and I think rightly so, to separate the minerals and petroleum part of the upstream petroleum part of petroleum into a department under the former DMRE minister, Minister Mantashe, and a separate Department of Energy and Electricity under a new minister, Minister Ramaphosa, who has been promoted and politically rewarded for his strong performance in bringing an end to load shedding. He was previously the Minister of Electricity in the Office of the Presidency, and his achievements, I think, were such that he was rewarded politically, and these two departments have split, and I think it's the right decision. And the new Minister of Energy and Electricity, Minister Ramaphosa, is responsible for electricity supply in South Africa. He's also responsible for midstream and downstream gas supply used in electricity, as well as in the industrial use of gas. The president also appointed a deputy minister, Minister Samantha Graham, Deputy Minister Samantha Graham, who comes from the opposition. So we even are seeing this coalition politics getting involved in the Department of Energy and Electricity. And again, I personally think this is a good thing. It makes politicians more accountable, and it introduces a measure of political competition, even within a department, to perform, to the expectations of customers and the public. The other emerging political structure is the so-called National Energy Crisis Committee, which was formed to really deal with load shedding. It was previously under the political custodianship of the Minister of Electricity, Minister Ramaphosa, and it remains under his custodianship, going forward. And really, it brings together the politicians from a number of different departments, and of course the officials from a number of different departments, as well as business and other stakeholders. So it's really brought, I think, a new effort, a national effort involving government and the private sector to deal with load shedding. And it has dealt with that effectively, and it's now moving on to new issues that are emerging in the transmission grid, as well as in the distribution networks. So moving on to energy planning in South Africa, I must tell you, first of all, up front, that I'm a believer that a lot of our problems in South Africa in the energy sector have been as a result of poor and uncoordinated energy planning in the country. And I'm going to try and explain where I'm coming from in this. So firstly, you can see, I see a kind of a pyramid structure for planning. And at the top, we should have certain non-negotiable policy principles. Now, not for me to decide what these non-negotiable policy principles are. It's for government. They are the elected government of the day. And I think it's important that they should define for themselves a set of overarching, non-negotiable principles, and then all the what follows below in the policies and the planning and the integrated resource plans for electricity and the regulations should, of course, be aligned with these non-negotiable policy principles. So what am I talking about here? Well, I'm talking about things like a commitment to climate change goals, specific targets in climate change goals. I mean, it's no good, having, goals in climate change, and then you promptly go ahead with your energy and electricity plans that are in conflict with your non-negotiable principles. So I think it's important to decide what are your principles. They can be climate change, they can be job creation, they can be water use, the fact that we're a water-constrained country and everything needs to be aligned with that. We can't start having generation plants that use a lot of water if it is a non-negotiable principle to reduce water consumption or to keep it within certain limits. And also equity issues, empowerment issues, transformation issues. these are the kind of non-negotiable policy principles that I'm talking about, to which everything else needs to be aligned. And then one needs to, when one moves into the energy space, start looking at your overarching energy and electricity policies. And this covers everything from coal, oil, gas, liquid fuels, electricity. We need to have we need to decide what our policies are, and these policies must be aligned with our non-negotiable principles. And then, of course, once we have set policies and principles, we need to develop an integrated energy plan that looks at all the different primary energy resources of the country, as well as all the energy carriers in the country and how energy is being used. And one needs to understand clearly the flow of energy from the primary energy resources through the energy carriers to processes that convert energy, and finally to the needs of the customer and the market. And these need to we need to have a clear picture, overarching picture of the energy environment that we're operating in. And beneath that, we need to have sector integrated resource plans. And these integrated resource plans, could and should include, for example, an integrated electricity plan, a coal master plan, a gas master plan, liquid fuel master plans, nuclear, renewable master plans, covering all the different energy sectors. And really, you're sitting there with an umbrella integrated energy plan to which these sector integrated resource plans need to be properly aligned. And then below that, of course, you start getting into the regulations for each of the different sectors. And so you can see this pyramid structure that involves the different aspects that I've been talking about. Now, I want to just now move on to what I call the integrated energy plan for South Africa, which, as I said, is a kind of an overarching umbrella plan that looks at all the energy resources of a country. Now, we have in South Africa the so-called National Energy Act. It's Act number 34, and it was published in 2008. And in this act, and this comes verbatim out of the act, straight out of the act, it says the minister must develop and on an annual basis review and publish an integrated energy plan in the government gazette for the country, a national and integrated energy plan. And it further goes on to tell you exactly what should be in this integrated energy plan, which you can see listed there. Things such as security of supply, economically available energy resource, affordability, universal access, social equity, employment, etc., etc. These are the kind of principles that I was talking about. The environment, international commitments to things like climate change, consumer protection, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so it's very clear as to what the act and what the law requires in South Africa. But having said all this, this Section 6 of the National Energy Act of 2008 was never enacted. The act was enacted, but Section 6 was exempted. In other words, the president said, I hereby bring into effect Act number 34, 2008, but Section 6 is for the time being on hold. And so the minister was never required to produce an integrated energy plan for South Africa. Despite the fact that if you read the act, you'll see Section 6, but it was exempted when it was promulgated. And I believe that that's one of the reasons why we've had the problems that we've had with energy planning, because we actually have never had, since 2008, an integrated energy plan, despite the fact that it's been a requirement in the act, but it was exempted. So where do we stand now? Well, interestingly, two civil society organizations, unfunded, small civil society pressure groups, took the president of South Africa and the Minister of Mineral Resource and Energy to court to say that this exempted Section 6, this is unlawful. The reason why you normally exempt, let's say, a section of an act is as a transitionary process, because sometimes an act cannot be enacted all together at the same time. And you need certain things to happen in sequence. And as a transitionary process, the president can exempt, a paragraph in the act for a particular time. But this now was stretching from 2008 until 2023. And eventually the president and the minister caved in and they said, you're right. They basically conceded that this Section 6 needed to be put into effect. And this is a verbatim, slide of what was gazetted in the government gazette on the 30th of March last year. And it said in very simple terms, very simple statement, in terms of Section 21 of the National Energy Act, I hereby determine, with effect from the 1st of April 2024, that's 1st of April this year, that Section 6 will come into operation. So from the 1st of April 2024, this exempted Section 6 came into effect. Now, what is the impact of this? Well, we have to now look at what Section 6 says. And to go back to the previous slide, it says that the minister must develop and publish an integrated energy plan annually, which means that from the 1st of April 2024, the minister has 1 year to produce the first integrated energy plan for South Africa, which means it's due to come into, it must be published in terms of the law by the 30th of March 2025. That's when we need an integrated energy plan. Will it happen by this date? I doubt it. I think the minister is going to have to apply for an extension or a condemnation for the fact that it is not going to be ready in time. We are told that the minister and the department are working on it, but an integrated energy plan may require more time. I mean, it's only 3 months away, 3.5 months away, and it's got to be public processes, etc., stakeholder engagement. These things do tend to take time, particularly in South Africa. So the good news is that we hope to have an integrated energy plan maybe sometime next year. Just to indicate what I've already said, I mean, this is the kind of output of an integrated energy plan. It's not the plan itself, but on the left-hand side, you see all the different primary energy resources. You see how, in the middle there, that orange block, a certain amount of coal, that's the black line, is converted into electricity. And that then goes and some of it reaches various industries, and some of that energy is wasted, because of the thermal electricity generation process is only 35% efficient. So the majority of that coal that goes into producing electricity, the energy in that coal, the majority of it is wasted, rejected energy, heat that is lost. But some of it goes to particular industries, and you can see this kind of flow diagram, which indicates how the primary energy resources on the left are converted and finally reach the productive economy on the right, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, non-energy, or transportation sectors. And some of it then to waste, the so-called rejected energy, the lost energy. And of course, that rejected energy, we've got to do everything possible, to minimize that, because that is energy lost. And there are ways of doing that. So, for example, a lot of the energy from coal is lost, whereas with renewable energy, you don't have those kind of losses. If you were to look at, liquid fuels, a lot of the energy in petroleum, liquid fuels, is lost because of the inefficiency of internal combustion engines. Well, if you go to electric vehicles, you can dramatically reduce those losses. So these are the kind of things that need to be considered. Now, this diagram you see in front of you was actually produced by the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in the United States in 2017. So it's seriously out of date. Doesn't include electric vehicles, doesn't include hydrogen, it's not up to date in any shape and form. And anyway, why should the Americans be doing this? This is what our integrated resource plan for electricity should be doing. Now, I just wanted to say is, what is actually an integrated resource plan for electricity. So we've talked about the integrated energy plan, and below that is the integrated resource plan for electricity. It's a sector plan. Well, I've tried to put my mind to trying to define what is an integrated resource plan for electricity. Well, in my mind, it's a techno-economic optimization study which leads to an indicative, broad, and least cost long-term national country plan that considers new generation requirements that meet the national electricity demand and provides electricity security. And this is important. It's not just the least cost plan. It's the least cost plan that meets these different requirements, the technical and policy constraints. And I've given a long list of what these constraints are, including what our resources are, the existing generation capacity, the new generation capacity, the shortfall. I'm not going to go into this detail. We don't have time, but this presentation is available to all. But I think probably most of you know what an integrated resource plan is, but sometimes we forget. And just to say, what's going on in South Africa at the moment with integrated resource planning for electricity, the IRP. Where are we now? What's going on? And I've tried to make a summary of this. It started many years ago with what is called the ICEP planning process. It involved transmission planning. The ICEP planning process was an Eskom plan. It was conducted, and it was for Eskom because at that time Eskom was the electricity monopoly, and so it made sense that Eskom would produce the plan. But over time, Eskom is no longer the monopoly, and one needs to also build in transmission process and also medium-term planning into the process. So, today Eskom does have its own planning processes. It has also a transmission development plan. It has what they call a medium-term system outlook plan. So these are all internal Eskom plans, but because the market is opening up, it doesn't make sense for Eskom, to be the planner and a player in the market. So now the integrated resource plan is kind of done independently of Eskom, but in conjunction with Eskom. The first IRP of any real significance was the IRP in 2010. It was quite a substantial document. And then in 2016, there was an attempt to update it. It didn't work out. It was never actually adopted, but finally in 2019, in fact in early 2020, the IRP 2019 was published. So that you can see a kind of a 9-year delay from 2010 to 2019. And now we have what is called the Draft Integrated Resource Plan 2023 that came out late December last year. Public comments took place early this year, up in March. It was a closing date. And then a lot of things happened. And finally, last week, was produced a new draft integrated resource plan 2024. It's actually not an IRP. It's a presentation on the IRP. And I'm going to tell you more about it. But it's not really an IRP. It's a presentation on an IRP that is yet to be released for public sight. And it has been announced that hopefully by the end of the first quarter next year, this draft IRP 2024 will be published as a final IRP 2025. Again, you can see a 6-year delay between 2019 and 2025. This is not what planning should be. First of all, we don't have an IEP. You need an IEP first, then you need an IRP. We tend to do things backwards sometimes, putting the cart before the horse. We have an integrated resource plan, which is 5 years late, and then we don't even have an integrated energy plan. This is some of the reasons why I think we have a planning problem in South Africa. In addition to this, there has been a change in the approach to planning. Initially, planning, in the days of the monopoly and in the early days, 2010, we had what we call a prescriptive national command and control type of planning approach. In other words, the IRP was prescriptive. It almost had the force of law. First, you have to have an IRP. Then the minister has to make a ministerial determination. Then that has to be concurred to, agreed to by the regulator NERSA. And then finally, public procurement processes start. And at that time, all processes were basically public procurement processes. But things have changed now. We have other players in the market, so not all procurements are in the public procurement process. You do not need a generation license for non-public procurement processes. And things have moved now from an IRP, which was a prescriptive national plan, to becoming more of an indicative planning document to give an idea of the sort of goals and objectives of the country, both at national level, provincial level, and even local level. So we are starting to see provincial IRPs. We're beginning to see large metros having their own IRPs. So it's a move away from this central command and control planning to a more distributed, indicative planning process at national, provincial, and local level towards a market-driven approach. So this is the opening slide of this presentation that was given last week. It is they call it here the Draft Integrated Resource Plan Stakeholder Workshops, November 2024. It was announced and released last week. And if you click on this slide, I'm not going to do it, but these slides are all available to all the people present. You will actually get a copy of this presentation that was presented last week. I haven't got time to go into it at the moment. It will take a lot, hours of presentation to go through it, but it's available for you. But again, just to summarize, where are we at the moment? The IRP 2019 is in need of an update. The draft IRP 2023 was published in December 2023. Public comments closed in March 2024. The national governments took place at the end of April, and a new government of national unity was formed in May, and then the separate departments of mineral and petroleum resources and a separate department of energy and electricity was established. A new minister was appointed, a new deputy minister was appointed, part of this GNU, Government of National Unity, and the stakeholder engagement process that was concluded earlier was reopened because the new minister decided that the previous draft there were sufficient important comments in the public process, which meant that they could not accept that draft 2023 IRP, and they reopened it for public comments, which took place last week. And then after last week, it's still got to then be updated. It's got to go for some of the government consultation processes between government, business, labor, and communities. It's called the NEDLAC process. It's then got to go to the cabinet for so-called policy adjustment, then got to go back to the DMRE for finalization and publishing. So maybe, okay, sorry, I made a problem with the date there. It should be published according to the minister by the 31st of March 2025, and I would say maybe not, maybe later, but sometime hopefully sooner rather than later. But that's where we are. There is an evolutionary process underway in South Africa, as it is in the case in Namibia, as we've heard, and in other countries in the region, and not only in the region, all the different BRICS countries, China, Industry, Russia, and Brazil have all undergone major evolutionary processes towards market reform. So we're moving from a vertically integrated monopoly, a state-owned enterprise, through to the single buyer model, where Eskom had its own generation resources, but it was also buying from IPPs, through to the unbundling of the electricity generation, transmission, and distribution sectors, which is in progress right now as we speak. There emerged the traditional one-to-one wheeling, with third-party access is allowed to public-funded essential grid infrastructure, and this has proceeded to a one-to-many, a many-to-one, and a many-to-many wheeling arrangement processes across the Eskom grid. And then further developments have taken place of what we call virtual wheeling and token wheeling, as well as electricity trading, which includes the sale and trading of electrical energy across Eskom and municipal networks to customers that are embedded in both Eskom and municipal areas of supply. And the next step, which is in progress at the moment, is the electricity market reform process, the establishment of a day-ahead and a balancing electricity market. These processes are in progress at the moment. The target is to have an electricity market, starting trading sometime in 2026. Maybe later, but it depends on how quickly the regulator can get to grips with the market code that is probably going to be presented to it shortly. And then, of course, I'm going to really skip through this very quickly to say that, to try and define what is the role of government and what is the emerging role of the private sector. And certainly the private sector is starting to play a more significant role in the rollout and the financing and assisting of government with planning and stepping in where the public sector fails to provide basic infrastructure. This is happening not only in generation, but now also looking at transmission, because Eskom's balance sheet is not strong enough to do what it has to do in the rollout of transmission infrastructure. And municipal distributors, don't have the wherewithal on many fronts to do what they need to do in the distribution sector. So we're beginning to see the emergence of public-private partnerships, PPPs, in the generation space, the transmission space, and also in the distribution space. I'm not going to go through the details of the slide, time has run out, but I just want to leave you with some links that may be of interest to you after this webinar. This presentation is available to you. Please feel free to look at our own website, my own published articles, the news in the sector that we publish every 2 weeks, the draft IRP that was issued for public comment in 2023. You can just click and download it. You can look at Outer's comments to the draft IRP 2023 to get an idea of some of the problems that were identified with the draft IRP. And then I've given a link to the latest presentation by the DMRE last week with this for the draft IRP 2024, which takes you really up to date exactly where we are today, as of today. What unfolds, after today, we will still see. But there are political processes. There's got a consultation that's got to take place. There's got to be policy intervention by government, and hopefully, finally, we'll have an IRP by the end of the first quarter, 2025, maybe. And maybe we will have an integrated energy plan sometime next year. Look, it's taken a long time. We're running late. We should have had this ages ago. But let's be positive that this is moving forward and not moving backwards right now. So I am optimistic that we are putting in place what we should have done many years ago. We're putting it in place, and better late than never. And with that, I'd like to again thank Africa GreenCo for the opportunity of really telling you about where South Africa is up to and what it's up to. And it's going to be really interesting for me to hear what the region is up to. So thank you, Lion. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that detailed presentation. I'm seeing a lot of questions dropping in the chat now, but while you prepare for that, I note transmission now in South Africa. You're now saying private sector should come into transmission. My first part of the question is the appetite. Are you seeing the appetite from private sector in investing in transmission? Phineas was talking about the limitations in evacuating power from Namibia via South Africa, which is one of the links they have. The other one is with Zambia, but it's not moving. Is there a business case for private sector to go in there?
Well, I think it remains to be seen still. What we do know is what we hear from our minister and from Eskom, and that is that I think they're looking at a dual process. A certain portion of the transmission rollout, or the so-called transmission development plan, which is a 10-year plan, certain portion of that will be done by Eskom in the traditional way, in which Eskom basically conceive and design and finance and supervise the construction by the private sector, and finally own and operate transmission corridors. And in parallel with that, I think there are going to be concessions to various concessionaires to design and finance and build and own, and maybe not own, but build and operate, and finally, after a number of years, transfer this asset to Eskom. So we're looking at these two different models, and the minister has been talking about and Treasury, National Treasury, has been talking about a pilot project where they will presumably pilot one of these concession corridors, transmission corridors with the private sector to get an idea on how it works and whether it works. But I do see a kind of a dual approach to transmission going forward.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm looking at one question in the chat, which is actually saying the elephant in the room is the big generator that we have in our various geographical jurisdictions, and this viewer is saying big central units who are supplying a market that depends on them are dinosaurs. Decentralized renewable energy generation in conjunction with energy efficiency and storage will outcompete these dinosaurs with easy and as time goes by. Your reaction to that?
Well, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure that that's correct, because ultimately the incumbent generators at Eskom, in fact, have a significant advantage in the playing field, because many of these generators have been amortized already. And the marginal cost of generation, therefore, is really the cost of coal and some operating and maintenance costs. But because you see, you have new generation, which is largely wind and solar and battery storage and maybe gas to power. But their costs are capital costs, financing costs, as well as operating and maintenance costs. But yes, they have the advantage that the energy cost in the case of wind and solar is very low. But the point is, they have to compete on the total cost of their project, whereas the incumbents may only have to compete on the marginal costs of their projects. So this gives, I think, an inherent advantage to the incumbents in some way or another. So I don't know. But it's going to be an interesting scenario to see how this plays out. There may indeed be stranded assets in time to come. But I don't think so at the moment, because we are still in a constrained supply situation. But hopefully we will move out of a constrained supply situation where market competition can really play an important role in improving efficiency and driving down the prices.
Thank you so much, Chris, for your insights and that presentation. I think there was a question earlier on in the chat whether these presentations will be shared, and I think, Jeho, the answer is yes. These presentations will be shared with the viewers, and if viewers have follow-up questions, they will be free to make follow-ups with the presenters and with yourself in particular, Chris. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. At this point, let me hand over to Jeho to continue with moderating this webinar. Jehoshaphat, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lion. Just having a bit of some technical challenges on my end. I hope you can get me clearly. And so, yeah, I think so far we've had a great and engaging discussion. And to just introduce our next presenter, perhaps I should try and turn on my camera. Yes, so our next presenter is Professor Joseph Mutale, who is an Emeritus Professor of Sustainable Energy and Electric Power Systems at the University of Manchester. He has over 40 years of experience in the electric utility industry and academia. And of course, prior to joining academia, he worked for CEC and ZESCO and was closely involved in the creation of the Southern African Power Pool, which is SAP. He co-founded the IEEE Working Group on Sustainable Energy Systems for Developing Communities in 2009 and the Zambian Renewable Energy Association in 2017. He's a subject matter expert focusing on energy under the World Bank, African Centers of Excellence, Zambia's first IRP for the electricity sector. And yeah, this was launched by the Ministry of Energy in February of 2024. And he is a chartered engineer and fellow of the Engineering Council of the UK, and fellow of the senior member of group. And so without further ado, I'll let through the IRP for Zambia. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And I just want to make sure that you can see my slides. Can you just confirm?
Yes, I can see your slides.
Thank you very much. Thanks, colleagues, for attending this webinar. I hope I'll be able to take you through the IRP, the Zambian IRP. And thanks to Africa GreenCo for providing this forum to be able to exchange information on what's happening in the energy sector in the region. So my talk will essentially consist of this outline. I'll provide a very quick introduction on the objective of the IRP, the methodology and the modeling tool that we use to develop the IRP. I'll then present the key findings of the IRP, and I'll then focus on implementation plan, what comes next after the IRP, because the plan by itself is not good enough. You need to be able to show how you're going to implement it. And after that, I'll speak to the key support that we are receiving regarding the implementation of the IRP, and I'll talk specifically about two programs. One is called GCIP, which is Green Cities and Infrastructure Program, and CIG, which is the Cities and Infrastructure Growth Program in Zambia. And then I will end with a flavor of the Ministry of Energy sector priorities. So in terms of the objective of the IRP, first of all, this plan is a 30-year plan, and it outlines a sustainable trajectory for electricity sector development in Zambia in generation, transmission, distribution, as well as energy access infrastructure development. Then, just to underscore the fact that the IRP is a Ministry of Energy plan. We heard from Chris earlier where he referred to ESCOM having developed the initial plan. And in Zambia, because of the development in the sector, this plan is actually a Ministry of Energy plan, and it was developed with technical assistance from FCDO through the Cities and Infrastructure for Growth Zambia assistance. The plan was launched by the Minister of Energy on the 13th of February this year. In terms of this overarching objective, the objective of this plan is really to ensure universal access to clean, reliable, and affordable electricity at the lowest total cost in terms of the environment, the social aspects, economic aspects, as well as financial aspects, all in alignment with Zambia's national development plans. So that is the overarching objective. In terms of the framework in which this plan was developed, so this diagram indicates what we looked at in developing the IRP. Essentially two things. One was the supply side, which is what kind of resources do we have in the country to exploit to produce electricity to meet what is on the right-hand side here, which is the demand side. So we needed to do a demand projection for the next 30 years to look at what's going on in the country. And in this regard, we looked at the development of residential, industrial, commercial, agriculture, mining, as well as transport sector, including electrification overall. And once we understood the supply side and the demand side, we then looked at the transmission infrastructure requirements to make sure that the generation that we're producing does in fact get to the demand side. Just a little note on the generation side. As I said earlier, we're looking at really those resources that we have in the country that we can exploit. And in the main, it was hydro, of course, solar, wind, coal, oil, biomass, and indeed, we did include nuclear as well, geothermal, and electricity imports. And in the main, we included what we called cross-cutting themes throughout the planning process, which included the impacts of climate on this plan, the environment, gender and social inclusion, a financial analysis aspect, as well as stakeholder consultations. Once we understood all these cross-cutting themes, we then looked at essentially producing a least cost plan. And to do this, we used a software tool called Antares, which is essentially a linear model of the system, and it produces a least cost generation plan, essentially using marginal costs as well as investment costs to make sure that we have the optimal balance between those two. And then finally, we needed to test the feasibility of those plans, because if you're using a linear model and you're really running an AC power system, we needed to use Dick-Silent Power Factory to essentially validate that we can actually operate that system safely and securely. And at the bottom, this is really showing that this is the sequence through which you're looking at. You produce short, medium, long-term plans, and then you need to take into account the framework in which these are going to be implemented, which is the regulatory policy changes that are needed to make sure that we can implement this plan. And then we need to look at procurement and financial action plans, which will then hopefully lead to infrastructure that is really resilient to the various considerations in this plan. Once you have the plan, we get to the implementation. I'll talk about this as we go along. So what are the key findings of the IRP? So in this slide, what you see is really the 30-year plan, with our baseline being 2020 and transitioning through what we call milestone years, which is 2026, 2030, 2040, and 2050. And the thing to note in here is that the essential objective of this plan was to take into account the economic diversification plans that the government has. And we see significant growth, which is being projected in agriculture, in power exports, in mining, and the residential sector. We've also included in here the transport sector as one area that we will foresee that there will be significant growth as we electrify transport. In terms of just a high kind of level numbers, the peak demand in Zambia is projected to rise by 121% from the current 2,456 megawatts as at the baseline year of 2020 to 5,422 megawatts by 2030. And this is going to rise to 11,000 megawatts by 2050. So these are significant developments in the sector in terms of demand. Once we understood that demand, we then needed to look at generation investments. But in doing so, one of the main objectives was diversification of the generation portfolio. As most of you know, the current Zambian generation portfolio is dominated by hydro. And as we have seen this year in particular, and in previous years indeed, the heavy reliance on hydro is now being subject to some challenges in terms of climate impacts. And this year in particular, we've seen significant reductions in the main power stations in Kafue system and the Kariba system, which has led us to where we are today with the significant load shedding. The intention of this plan was actually to diversify the generation mix. And what we see is that we are seeing generation growing from the current portfolio, which is again at 2023 levels. We're sitting at about 3,700, just over 3,700 megawatts. And that is growing to just over 10 gigawatts by 2030. And by the time we get 2050, we will grow to 23 gigawatts. It is important just to note, and some of you will notice that in the previous slide, I mentioned that the demand will be going to just over 5,400 megawatts, whereas the generation here is 10 gigawatts. So there's a significant margin over and above that. The reason for that is really because in the diversification process, we are going to have significant penetration of solar PV and wind. And in fact, by 2030, we're expecting to grow the proportion of variable renewable energy sources, mainly solar and wind, by over 30%. So at the moment, we are sitting at 3% contribution. That is at 2020. I know the current figure is a little bit higher than that because there have been some new development of CEC commissioning some solar PV plants on the copper belt. But at the time, it was 3%. And this is going to grow to 33% by 2030. And by the time we get to 2050, we'll have, in fact, 56% of our generation portfolio coming from renewables, which is a significant diversification of the sector. And the graph on the left-hand side shows you the proportion of each of the generation sources that we're going to have in the IRP, which includes hydro, thermal, geothermal, renewables, we include biomass, and of course, solar, PV, and wind. You will notice that despite being in the consideration, nuclear doesn't feature here, and neither do significant liquid fuels feature, because we were taking pragmatic decisions on what we are able to actually support in the short to medium term. Once we had an understanding of where we are in terms of the generation sources and the demand centers, we needed to make sure that that power can go from generation sources to demand centers. And this is the expansion plan that the IRP proposes up to 2050. And you can see, and I'm not going to go into detail in terms of each of the lines here, but you can see in the key, the voltage levels of each of these developments. The solid lines indicate where we have current infrastructure. The dotted lines are the new developments. Now, in order to make sure that we have universal access to electricity, one of the things that we also did was to project what needs to be done in terms of financing to reach universal access, including in the off-grid space. And that projection suggested that we need at least 3.9 billion to provide energy to the 57% of Zambia's population which has no access. And this will be predominantly using renewable energy sources. And the rest, for those that have no access, will be connected via the grid. It is hoped that the options that are being proposed, and in this regard, I'll mention that we now are in the process of developing what they call a renewable rural electrification master plan update, which will essentially produce projects that need to be implemented between now and 2030 in terms of mini grids, solar home systems, and grid connections to facilitate this universal access. So this diagram shows that by 2030, the gray shaded area on the top left of this graph disappears, which means everybody will have access through the various means that are indicated here. It's worthwhile just mentioning the human dimensions of the IRP. It is estimated that by implementing the IRP, we're going to create about 700,000 new and permanent jobs both direct and indirect, between now and 2050. And those jobs will hopefully provide opportunities for our youth and SMEs to participate in the energy sector. It was also worthwhile just to mention that as part of the IRP, a social standards, social safeguards framework has been developed. This is to ensure that in the implementation of these big projects, we are really taking account of, or at least avoiding the negative impacts that projects of this type could have in terms of labor exploitation, possibly sexual harassment, and to amplify the positive impacts in terms of employment for the youth, women, as well as persons with disabilities. So just thought I would mention that this is one aspect which was taken into account. So in terms of investment needs, we are projecting that by 2030, we will require of the order of 11.6 billion US dollars in order to be able to implement the IRP as it is planned. And that figure will rise to 1 billion by 2050. And these are huge numbers. Significant proportion of this will be mostly generation. By 2030, we expect out of the 11 billion, 77.2 billion will actually be in terms of generation investments. And as indicated already, on the off-grid specs, we're looking at figures of the order of 2.2 billion by 2030. And the tables on the right indicates the total spend by 2050, as well as the total spend between now and 2030. So what comes next? The current focus is actually to see how the integrated resource plan, which was launched earlier, as I said, this year, can be implemented. There are a number of issues that need to be taken into account to implement this plan. You'll see on the right 9 specific areas where we're focusing in order to ensure that we have a framework that ensures that this plan can be implemented successfully, but also that it can be refreshed every so often. We heard from Chris some of the delays in South Africa of getting the integrated resource plan for South Africa being revised, and the hoops that you have to jump through. So the first item there, we are essentially looking to establishing an energy planning center that will be responsible, making sure that we have regular updates of the integrated resource plan. And that will be essentially under the Ministry of Energy, for the reasons, again, that I think Chris ably articulated, that ZESCO, which is a current vertically integrated entity responsible for most of the energy sector value chain, will now no longer be a monopoly. There will be significant developments due to the open access regime where other players are going to enter into this market. And therefore, it is essential to make sure that we've got an entity that can have an overarching view of the entire sector. So the second point is the procurement framework. Once you have these projects, you need to put in place a procurement framework that will ensure that we've got a level playing field for access to this market. Another important thing is the financial sustainability. One of the major challenges, certainly, that we have experienced in Zambia, in terms of moving this market forward, has been the financial sustainability of the sector. It is very important for us to have a sector that is bankable. Otherwise, it's almost impossible to get projects over the line if the PPAs that are signed are not respected by financiers. And I've already talked about the access in terms of the REMP update, and I've talked about the social safeguards framework. And another point that just to mention is that we're also very much looking at regional integration in terms of connecting to SAP and the Eastern African Power Pool. And in this regard, there's actually work going on at the moment of establishing the link to the Eastern African Power Pool, which we hope will be commissioned by 2027. And I've already mentioned the need to remain committed to our climate commitments beyond COP29, beyond COP29. And one of the things, of course, that we need to do if we're going to implement this project successfully is to make sure that we've got a monitoring and evaluation framework that keeps tabs on exactly what is going on in the implementation part. The last one is the independent system market operator that we're now working on as a new initiative to actualize the open access regime that has been launched in Zambia. So I've just talked briefly about the two programs that I mentioned, which is the GSIP and the CIG Zambia. The program that I talked about, the GSIP, is also funded by FCDO, and it's got essentially a number of work streams that I'll focus on a few key ones. One is the fast track procurement. As I indicated before, and I think this has also been kind of touched upon by Chris, we need to address the current challenges in the sector, and there's a fast track procurement framework that's being supported to make sure that we can deal with the current crisis in as speedy a process as we can, starting, in the fourth quarter of the next year. And as I said, in energy procurement environment is extremely important to make sure that we give confidence to the market, the private sector in particular, that we are operating within, commercially and financially sustainable frameworks that are transparent. The financial sustainability I've already talked about. It's extremely important that at the moment, ZESCO itself becomes bankable. And there are a number of steps that are being taken to make sure that this happens. In terms of the CIG program, we are working, apart from what I've already mentioned in terms of Energy Planning Center, we are looking at supporting an IRP financing plan, which is really focusing on creating a comprehensive strategy to secure funding for the IRP. And this initiative will essentially aim to align financial structures within Zambia's energy goals by identifying funding opportunities and leveraging public and private investments, and also addressing the policy reforms that will ensure this project financing is sustainable. I've already mentioned one of the key pieces of work that we're doing, which is essentially supporting the implementation of the open access framework through establishing an independent system and market operator that will do some of the functions that, again, I think have been ably articulated earlier in terms of balancing, access the local market, the sub-market, by all the players that will be playing in the energy sector. As we know, the open access regime is really opening up the sector to, in our case, to bilateral contracts between willing buyer, willing seller. Some of the issues that have been talked about in terms of use of system charges and bundling of the tariffs. These are some of the things that we also need to deal with in the work that we're doing. So to conclude, I just want to give you a flavor of what the Ministry of Energy priorities are in the sector. There are a number of issues here. One, of course, I've already mentioned too, one of the key sectors is the emergency power. As I said before, we are in a situation where we have, of course, a significant deficit in terms of energy, not capacity, but energy because of the water. So we need to make sure that those projects that can be fast-tracked, especially in terms of the renewable project that can be implemented quickly, solar PV in particular, we can have a framework that can do that. And we are now working on actually assessing the capacity of the current infrastructure to be able to connect solar PV at different nodes of the system without having to reinforce it. And the second point, in terms of the Ministry of Energy sector priorities, is improving the power sector bankability. And this is extremely important if we're going to make any traction in terms of implementing the IRP. The third point is promoting the private sector investment in power generation and transmission. In generation, I think the issues are probably a little bit clearer. However, in transmission, and I'll echo completely Chris's sentiments on this, this is something that we needed to, in fact, explore. How do we get public-private partnerships in the transmission area? This is something that is also of interest here. And I've already mentioned the sector priority for the ministry, which is creating the independent system and market operator. And we're aiming to publish a roadmap for launching the independent system and market operator in the year 2025, next year, essentially. And of course, I've already talked about another key area, which is developing a structured procurement framework for the energy sector, essentially to launch a new procurement framework which will facilitate development of priority projects in line with the IRP, and also to designate a single agency to coordinate the procurement. And a slight difference here is that whereas in South Africa you got municipalities, in Zambia we do not. We have simply ZESCO that supplies power from a distribution point of view to practically all the entities, save for one entity in the northwestern province that provides power to a local community. And of course, the energy planning and climate finance, and I've mentioned this before, in order to make sure that in the future we can ensure that this plan can be revisited as often as it needs to, we're establishing this energy planning center that will make that possible. And finally, I already spoke about the off-grid space. The ministry is focusing very much on trying to achieve this universal access by 2030, and is presently reviewing through the Verification Authority, the Verification Master Plan to make that possible. Just as a way of just being holistic, we're also looking at the fuel sector in terms of the ability to maintain stable and efficient supply of fuel within the country through currently the Tazama pipeline. But most of this is something that's going to be in the future. But very happy to answer any questions, and I'd like to thank you all for your kind attention for this presentation. And once again, thank you, Africa GreenCo, for the opportunity to share these developments in Zambia. At the top of the presentation, you'll see a link to the IRP, and if you click on that link, you'll be able to see all the documents related to the IRP. Once again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Mtale. That was really informative, and it was a great presentation. Thank you so much. I think there is just a few questions in the chat, as well as in the Q&A section. I'd like to draw your attention to this one in the Q&A section, which is, could you elaborate on how the transmission grid by zone was represented in the IRP modeling via a simulator? Could the IRP output also inform the need for grid expansion?
I'll answer the simpler one first. Certainly it certainly informs. The IRP does inform the grid expansion needs. And where you're having new generation, it's extremely important to coordinate generation development and grid development. What we don't want to do is to have generation being developed without the ability to be able to evacuate the power into the main grid. So there is a significant coordination there in terms of the grid expansion and the generation development. So that, I can assure you that certainly exists. In terms of zones, I'm not sure what that actually is speaking to. What I can say is that one thing that we did in the IRP was to actually balance the development of the projects in the IRP across the country, leveraging the resources that are in each of the provinces in Zambia. Most of the hydro projects are actually, if not all, are actually run of the river, and they are located in the northern part of the country, where the hydrology is actually much more stable than in the southern part of the country. In the IRP, we projected a reduction of about 7.5% in the precipitation in the Kafue and Zambezi Basin. And this is from our climate work stream that advised that this is what we project. So you'll find there are no major developments in the southern part of the country, but rather in the northern part of the country. So maybe if I haven't answered that fully, please feel free to come back on that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I mean, there's one that says, why is nuclear seen as not pragmatic?
Okay, it's a good question. Two key issues. One, the current technology that we think could potentially be applicable in Zambia is the kind of the modular technology, smaller size nuclear plants. But these plants haven't been proven, I think, anywhere in Africa as yet. And for the proven facilities, which is the larger nuclear plants, first of all, these are extremely expensive plants. Yeah. So when we model this, what we put into the model essentially is the capital cost of implementing nuclear programs and the operating costs, the marginal costs. And the program simply said it wasn't viable at this stage. So that is the reason they were not in there. I think to put into our plan a nuclear program, would have to be absolutely sure that this can be implemented cost effectively with technology that is viable within our system, which by any standard, although it looks big compared to Namibia, 3.7 or 3.8 gigawatts, it's still a relatively small system. And if you're putting into that system a nuclear plant, which is 1,000 megawatts, I think there are issues to consider there as well. Thank you.
I think I'm seeing two, which are highlighting on the challenges that of the project. I'm just trying to check in the chart. I've lost it. They keep.
Yeah, I saw one question about whether there's something we can learn from Get Fit.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah,
That's the most recent one.
absolutely. There's something to learn from there. And for me, I think the key lesson is that in order for our plan to work, we need to absolutely focus on getting the sector to be bankable. The reason that the Get Fit project didn't proceed was that their PPAs were signed with ZESCO. And so an off-taker who was willing and ready to take the power. However, the balance sheet, ZESCO's balance sheet for the last few years has been challenging. And it was not possible for these programs to go forward because of the risks, the perceived risks associated with signing the PPAs and actually honoring those PPAs. So a lot of the effort have been in terms of solving those issues. And I'm glad to report that, yes, the Get Fit projects are now hoping to proceed to completion. But the lesson learned is that we need to make sure that the sector is bankable and the risk allocation is very clear in terms of, the off-takers and the investors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think there's still quite a number of questions, which I think we can still address at the end of the session, as we're going to have more questions at the end of the session. But I think for now, I would like to introduce our next speaker to take us through the the Zimbabwean landscape, and that is our director for Zimbabwe, Lion. And so, yeah, Lion serves as our country director for the southern region. Network is not very stable. I hope you can get me. Yeah, so his career includes serving as the head of electricity trading at the Zimbabwe Electricity Transmission and Distribution Company, ZETDC, where he led the procurement of electricity imports to Zimbabwe and managed supply from local generators. Lion has attributed to market evolution and policy development as an electricity markets advisor for SAP, the Eastern African Power Pool, the World Bank, and his expertise spans power market design, market rules, development, electricity trading, and structuring PPAs, making him a seasoned professional. And I've had the pleasure of working with Lion, and I must say it's been incredible. And Lion, I'll let you take on from here. Thank you. And yes, I can see your screen. But your mic is on mute.
Thanks, Joe. Is my screen, is it full screen now?
Not yet. Try to put it in presenter mode.
Okay, let me try and put it in presenter mode.
Any luck, Lion? I think we're still seeing the same screen.
Let me stop sharing and reshare. Have I stopped sharing?
Yes, I have.
Okay, let me see if I can reshare. Sorry, something funny happening this side.
Yeah, we can see your screen. But
oh, it's not coming into presentation mode, is it?
okay. No, not yet, not yet.
Oh.
Are you able to just click on the presentation mode, which seems to be appearing on my screen here? That's
okay.
it. You got it now.
There you go.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much, Joe. I'm going to take you through the Zimbabwe space. I will not focus specifically on the IRP in Zimbabwe because the IRP in Zimbabwe is actually under development as we speak. The last IRP was done in 2012, which is more than 10 years ago. So the government has gone out and contracted somebody to work on the IRP. So we are expecting the IRP to be out probably in the next few months. We will have the Zimbabwe IRP. However, I will run you through the space that renewable energy. I'll focus specifically on renewable energy. I'll talk here and there about other forms of energy, but I'll focus on renewable energy. There are so many policies that have been put in place in Zim that it will feed into the renewable energy, into the integrated resource plan. So I'll briefly run you through the current landscape in Zimbabwe. We have what we call Vision 2030, which seeks to achieve middle income status by 2030. And this ambition really focuses on securing stable and reliable electricity access. They have been probably the last 10 years or so, there have been persistent power shortages in the country. This has become worse this year because of the hydrology that Professor Mtale was referring to. Zambia and Zimbabwe feed from the same source of hydro energy, and this has worsened this year. I think a year ago, Zimbabwe added 600 megawatts of coal at Hwange Power Station in 2023. The effect of this 600 megawatts is not really being felt because supply is strained. At some point, you will find in the country available generation capacity hitting around 1,000 megawatts, even below in some instances. And the maximum it can go to is 1,600 megawatts. And this targeting a peak demand of 1,900 megawatts. I'll briefly explain. You may see, or you might have seen this peak demand of 1,900 megawatts for the past 7, 8, or 9 years. And you could be wondering why it's not changing. This is really, this demand of 1,900 megawatts is a suppressed demand. At its highest, the peak demand in Zimbabwe went as high as 2,200 megawatts. So coming down to 1,900 megawatts is a combination of suppressed demand and some operations also that may have closed shop. So we're seeing blackouts or curtailment or load shedding, as we commonly call it, of up to 14 hours, sometimes even longer. And this is a result of the space that does not have sufficient generation capacity. We are still talking of insufficient generation capacity, but as I go down the presentation, you will realize that we also have insufficient transmission capacity, but I'll come to that at a later stage. Some of the ambitions that we have are targeting rural electrification. There's been some notable progress, but the vision for 2030 is to achieve universal access. The government is working with private sector, with development partners, particularly looking at rural areas, focusing on mini grids in the rural areas. There are lots of success stories with mini grids, and one of the challenges with mini grids in Zimbabwe has been viability of the grids because of the population that the mini grids do serve. But with the combinations of funding structures, there have been some mini grids that have really worked very well in Zimbabwe. But let me come down to the case for urgent action that is needed in Zimbabwe. The energy deficit that we see is mainly being driven by domestic and mines. There's a lot of development of residential areas, but more significantly, there are lots of, you may very well be aware that Zimbabwe is endowed with huge deposits of minerals. And in recent years, the increase in exploring the mineral deposits has just shot up. And now it is the power supply that is becoming the bottleneck in the development of the various mines that have been identified. Agriculture as well is a huge consumer of electricity in Zimbabwe, and disruptions in irrigation, particularly when we talk of winter wheat production. the disruptions in supply have had a very negative impact on production of winter wheat and general farming irrigation. Tourism as well. Service disruptions have tended to undermine competitiveness of the energy sector. Whilst the demand is hovering around 1,900, the ambitions or the projections are that by 2030, this demand is going to rise to 5,200 megawatts. But this will only be achieved if the generation itself is availed. If it is not availed, that demand will remain suppressed. But these are the projections that we have, and these are the ambitions that the country has. And in meeting that ambition, the country is focusing on solar, hydro, coal, and wind. I think wind, there are a number of sites in Zimbabwe or districts in Zimbabwe that have huge wind potential that can actually come in very handy in alleviating the supply deficit in the country. This alongside with expansion of the grid. It is estimated that the Zimbabwe grid needs about 4.4 billion to expand it and make it robust enough to be able to move power from source to sink with minimum disruptions. I will explain later in a slide that is coming why there is so much, there is need for such a huge investment in grid expansion and in reinforcement. But suffice at this point to mention that having realized the challenges that the country has, having realized how inadequate power supply has impacted the economy in the country, the government itself has put massive weight behind getting energy projects running. Shortly, I will also talk about what the challenges are. Why are we not getting that investment in the energy sector? What do you need to do as IPPs to bring in your generation in the country? But just one pronouncement that links with the political weight that the government has put behind energy projects in the country is that in April 2022, it was realized that Professor Mtale was referring to the bankability of ZESCO. It is exactly the same in Zimbabwe, probably a little bit worse in Zimbabwe in terms of bankability of ZTTDC or ZESA as you commonly know it. And government recognized that we will not get sufficient investment in generation based on ZTTDC or ZESA as the off-taker. Then a pronouncement was made in April 2022 that the responsibility to supply electricity, especially to industry and mines, would be devolved from the central national utility to private sector and the consumers themselves. What the government was just saying was, please don't look at ZESA as the sole supplier of power. If you look at the legal framework, then the Electricity Act long provided for supply of electricity from other sources other than the national utility, but implementation of that has not been followed up. And it is in 2022 that the government then made a broad statement to say, please stop looking at ZESA as the sole supplier of power. You can look at yourselves, you can look at other private partners you can work with, you can look at traders, you can look at directly importing power from wherever you can get that power. That was a huge step in the electricity space in Zimbabwe that then triggered quite some different form of interest. There has always been interest from private sector to put up IPPs, but the challenge has always been bankability. When you do everything else, but when you get to bankability, banking a ZESA PPA has been a challenge. But this pronouncement by government has reignited the interest in private sector that was wearing out because of the bankability ZESA. I will just run through a few of the policies which on which the electricity sector relies or is based on. I'm not going to go into the details of these policies. We do have right at the top the National Energy Policy. Again, this was done in 2022. And this National Energy Policy, together with the Renewable Energy Policy, do target 1,100 megawatts of renewable energy by 2025. I will tell you where we are now with that penetration and that ambition. We are very, very, very far. I think we with renewable energy, excluding large hydro projects like Kariba, I think we are generating just about 147 megawatts of renewable energy out of the total of 1,600 when it gets there. Only 147 is coming from renewable energy. Well, there is also a chunk that's used to come from Kariba when the hydrology is good. There is also the Zimbabwe National Climate Change Response Strategy, which establishes specific provisions for dealing with climate change. And this policy has quite some weight that it puts behind development of renewable energy projects like wind, solar, and mini hydros. Together with the climate policy, they are looking at how agriculture and industry and the electricity sector can help mitigate the climate change and make the national contribution to the country's goals. Vision 2030, I've referred to that earlier, but just a little bit running through the legislation that governs the electricity sector. We do have the Electricity Act of 2002. We have the Rural Electrification Act, Environmental Management Act. I'll talk more about the Environmental Management Act when I talk to the requirements that you need to have for you to start an IPP in Zimbabwe. The Petroleum Act focuses on petroleum, and the Energy Regulatory Authority that then gives us the regulator in the country. I'll quickly come now to the transmission. I spoke about generation. I'll jump to transmission at this point. For transmission has a huge impact in the region. When you look at the diagram that you see on my screen is actually looking at the whole of SAP, but within the blue circle there, you are looking at Zimbabwe in particular. So the existing lines are the green lines that you see there, but the red lines are the planned interconnectors. You may have heard of Zizabona. You will see it in the next slide. Zizabona, which seeks to connect Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia, right in the north west side of that circle there. There is also a planned line that connects, a second line connecting Zimbabwe to South Africa. The current line is connecting Zimbabwe through Botswana, through a substation called Pokoje, into Zimbabwe to a substation called Nsukamini. There is a plan to connect from Njelele in South Africa to Triangle in Zimbabwe, and then reinforce the whole grid that then allows that then bypasses the current transmission bottleneck in the country. Between Zambia and Zimbabwe, the biggest internal transmission bottleneck does exist between two substations called Alaska and Sherwood, and it is one. If you look at the diagram there, it is indicated in a broken line, which is representing internal lines that need strengthening. And although the line from Hwange to Sherwood does need reinforcement, the real congestion that affects movement of power, not just in Zimbabwe, but in the whole region connecting the north to the south, is the line that connects the central part of the country, substation called Sherwood, to the substation that then faces Kariba, which is called Alaska. Once that line is reinforced, movement of power from south to the north flows in much bigger volumes than the current capacity that the lines can carry, which will then allow the whole region to rely on each other and even use a regional integrated resource plan, because then in terms of cost efficiency, we will be able to rely on the most efficient generator, irrespective of where it is located in the region. But as things stand today, we have those limitations. These are the lines that I was describing there. Only that here I just wanted to highlight the specific transmission lines. There is also a line which, well, there's this line, that's the Zimbabwe-South Africa line there that connects to Njelele. But the Mozi line connects to Mozambique, parallel to the line that currently exists between Songo and Bindura. There is another line that is being planned to connect the eastern part of Zimbabwe to Mozambique. Those two lines started as Mozisa. Initially, it was being planned as Mozisa. It was one single project, which was Mozambique, Zimbabwe, South Africa. But it has now been broken down into two. That's why I marked that with stars. That's really to say it's no longer one single project that is connecting Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. But it's the two projects have been broken into two parts. One Mozambique, Zimbabwe, the other Zimbabwe, South Africa. If you intend to then be part of the IPP process or the investment process in Zimbabwe, I will run you through. This is specifically for those of us on the call who are from Zimbabwe. I think they are familiar with all these steps, or those who are already in the energy space, they are familiar with these steps. But if you are an investor who wants to come into Zimbabwe and take a place in the energy space, these are some of the key requirements that you'll need to satisfy. I will skip the first one. I'll talk about ZIDA later, but I'll start with the land use permit, because this really, for most investors that are coming outside Zimbabwe, wanting to invest in Zimbabwe, it becomes a little bit complex and sometimes very confusing in terms of what you need to do. All land in Zimbabwe, it's either belongs to the local authority, which are the districts, the rural districts, or to the government through the Ministry of Lands. So if you want to, okay, if a few portions of land belong to mines, if mines have large deposits where they will have been granted rights there, they own that land as well, and there is not much difficult in getting permits to put up your solar plant or your wind plant there. But if it is land that belongs to a local authority, you will need to go through the local authority, apply for a permit to change the use of that land, which traditionally is agricultural land. Once you agree with the local authority, you then together, or with their permission or their blessing, you go to Ministry of Lands, and then they grant you the land use permit. And that's the process that a lot of people, a lot of investors really need to be careful about. A lot of the land, or some of the land that is available in the country, is a bit difficult to convert usage. You will eventually get it, but the process gets very long for some of the land. But there are portions of land where that process will be much easier. I'll talk more about that when I talk about ZIDA. Ministry of Environment, somebody asked the question, earlier on about the weight of environmental issues on licensing. In Zimbabwe, the environmental issues do carry a lot of weight. So you will need to get the clearance from the Ministry of Environment as well. You will need to do your feasibility study. On your own, you can get your own consultants to do the feasibility study for yourself. You will need a grid impact study. If you have identified your piece of land and you identify the point on the grid where you want to connect your project, then you go back to ZETDC and ask them to do a grid impact study to establish what the impact of injecting power from your plant to the grid at that point would be. So very often, particularly at this stage, the results have generally been positive, but some substations are getting oversubscribed. So it's not just a matter of seeing a good piece of land or seeing land that is available that you then assume you can do your project there. Before you go to the regulator to apply for your license, you will need to get an off-taker who will express interest in your project. Traditionally, that off-taker used to be the national utility ZESA. So you would go to ZESA and ask them to just write an expression of interest. Then the regulator would know you are putting this plant with a possible off-taker. But that is non-binding. It's only for the regulator to be able to assess viability of your project. But right now, after the 22nd of April, that expression of interest does not necessarily have to come from the national utility only. You can even get the expression of interest from individual customers like mines. You can get the expression of interest from traders. You can get the expression of interest even from consumers outside the country. After that, then you go to the regulator and apply for your ZERA license. You will also, once you have your license, you then go back to the national utility and negotiate a connection agreement, which is the point where you start allocating some of the risks that we also talk about in the bankability of the projects. Grid risk, you need to start thinking of how grid risk should be allocated in the connection agreement. After that, you will also need a use of system agreement. If you want to trade the power on your own, if you have your own customer as an IPP and you want to be able to supply your customer directly, then you need a use of system agreement with ZETDC that will govern how your power will flow, how your under deliveries will be managed, how your over deliveries will be managed, how power will be balanced, how the reconciliation will be done. And finally, then you'll need your PPA with the off-taker. But let me go back and then talk about ZEDA. You will see the steps that I've highlighted there for somebody who comes from a country probably where you just go to one place and you get all these things done, or you just go to two places. You may then be wondering, can this process be done that easily? Having realized that difficulty, the government created ZEDA, that stands for Zimbabwe Investment Development Agency, to facilitate registration of investment in the country, to also facilitate the smooth processing of your investment application in the country. So if you felt, as I was talking through all those steps, that this is just too much, or if you felt, how then do I know which land is available? How then do I know if I'm getting land that is available? How do I know where to move? Where do I get the local authority? Where do I get the Ministry of Lands? You can actually just go to the ZEDA offices, and they will be able to guide you from their offices step by step. And that process, I can assure you, has become very smooth. For those who registered their projects before the formation of ZEDA, they will agree, they will testify that it was much more complex before ZEDA than it is today. What are the challenges? Why then are we not having investment in energy, or why are we moving so slowly? Why is the demand stuck at 1,900 megawatts for more than 10 years. Why is it not moving? The key issues that we have in Zimbabwe, that if you do want to come and invest in this space, and particularly in the renewable energy space, there are two key issues which are related. One is the currency issue. The second one is the bankability. Why bankability? Because for a long time, like I explained before, you would then need ZTTDC to sign the PPA, and financiers would be very reluctant. Sometimes they would put conditions that ZTTDC would not be able to meet. Some finances that are a little less risk averse have come in and negotiated escrow accounts, and they've actually invested and developed IPPs on the strength of escrow accounts. But the other finance markets are still not comfortable with the escrow account and the other risks that are attendant to having ZTTDC as the off-taker. And the major risk that we do have, or that is being cited by investors and financiers in the country, is the currency risk related to payment risk. So if you then say, no, I'm no longer selling to ZTTDC, I have a private off-taker, the issue then becomes, will I be able to repatriate my profits? Will I be able to pay my loans? Will I be able to take my money out of the country and service my debt? This is a critical issue. Like I pointed out earlier on, the government is taking this very seriously, and they actually is a task team that has been put in place to look at how to unlock this gem that we are in, and that task team includes team members from the Central Bank, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, from the Ministry of Finance, from Ministry of Energy and Power Development, from ZIDA, from ZERA, the regulator, and from the national utility themselves. They sit down each time a financier or a project comes in and raises issues. That task team sits down and discusses with you how your perceived risks can be mitigated. So it is possible, therefore, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Reserve Bank, but it is possible that if you do have issues with currency, you can actually be, through the guidance of ZIDA, be taken through the process of getting to the Reserve Bank, through the Ministry of Finance, and put in place mechanisms that will allow you, or that allow you to service your debts using hard currency. There are two statutory instruments that have created a little bit of a challenge. You may be aware that in Zimbabwe, we have our local currency, which is called ZiG, or short form for Zimbabwe gold. And we also use the US dollar. Fine, we are also allowed to use the rand, but it's not really being used in the projects that much. In fact, there is no project that is investing in rands, just the US dollar. So the investment comes in US dollar, but the consumers can pay either in US dollars or in the local currency. The statutory instrument that I've highlighted there, which I want to draw the attention of our viewers to, is what is called the statutory instrument 131 of 2022. This statutory instrument said if somebody is exporting or is partially exporting, is producing something for export, it means they are receiving hard currency. They should pay their electricity bills in hard currency. If somebody is partially exporting, or those that are exporting at least 80% of their production, should also pay a portion of their electricity bills in hard currency. Then ZESA had other provisions where how they would process these deposits so that they can then use the deposits to import electricity, any other spare parts or maintenance works that need hard currency, loan repayments, insurance, all that stuff. it would then it would be catered for through the invoice or the bill payments that ZESA receives from such exporting clients. Then came another instrument which came, which is statutory instrument 93. What this statutory instrument did was to come and look at the statutory instrument 131 and limit the scope of statutory instrument 131. Instead of it saying everybody who is exporting should be billed in hard currency and paying and pay in hard currency, it then said if you are not an exporter, you have a choice to pay in hard currency or not. In fact, the invoice comes to you, and you choose when the invoice comes whether you want to pay hard currency or you want to pay using local currency. Your guess is as good as mine. The bulk of the customers then shifted to local currency, and that created a gap within ZTTDC cash flows, and that significantly restricted the capability of ZTTDC to honor their debts, and that worsened the investment climate, the electricity space. Let me then just quickly look at this is the supply space. I've looked at that. I'll move on to what the investment climate then is doing to address some of those problems that we are having, where investment is stuck because investors have issues. These are some of the measures that the government has put in place. If you do have a good renewable solar project, you can actually apply for national project status. And when you do get that national project status, that grants you some exemptions from duty and also gives you tax holidays. 4 days ago, we actually had our national budget, and under energy, the Minister of Finance reiterated the energy incentives, providing duty exemptions, tax holidays for projects or for imports that are coming in for renewable energy projects, which means if we are to take advantage within the short time that we have now, we don't know how long those exemptions will remain in place. We will have quite some significant exemptions in terms of duty payment. There is also what we call prescribed asset status, and this status just allows your project to recourse to insurance and pension schemes. That allows pension schemes to create space for pension schemes to invest in your project for a long term. Here are a few proposed solutions that I have here for you. If you are coming in with your new renewable energy project and it's getting stuck at financial close, in addition to what the government is doing to make your project bankable, or what it is allowing you to do to make your project bankable, you also have the option to collaborate with multinational institutions to de-risk the project through project guarantees. I can describe here the guarantees that I work for Africa GreenCo, but I can describe for you here the guarantees that Africa GreenCo does provide related to this. And Africa GreenCo is a trader, it's an aggregator, it's an intermediary off-taker. And the options that Africa GreenCo does have are in addition to giving you a payment guarantee that is underwritten by AA- guarantors. That in addition to that, Africa GreenCo then allows itself or positions itself in a situation where your power that you generate, Africa GreenCo can take it to a specific customer, to a specific mine For short, medium term tenures, it doesn't, although Africa GreenCo can sign 25-year PPA with yourself, the off-taker doesn't necessarily have to sign a 25-year PPA, which has been one of the issues really with financiers. To get a mine or a manufacturer sign a 25-year PPA doesn't give, is not a situation that gives a lot of comfort to financiers. But GreenCo then signs the medium-term PPAs, 5 years, 4 years. At the end of that PPA is either renewed or GreenCo looks for an alternative off-taker or takes your power to the market. So you have that option now where you then also have various routes that you can take, various recourse that you take, rather than be restricted to the national utility. The simplification of the process for licenses and land acquisition, this I've referred to ZIDA. This is not something that GreenCo can do for you. This is something that that ZIDA can do. Now, one of the things that the government of Zimbabwe has done, realizing the challenges of bankability, has been to sit down. They even went as far as getting an international consultant to come and advise them on what it is that the government needs to do to ensure projects are banked. And the consultant came up with what is called a government project support agreement. This support agreement covers the risks some of the risks, not all of the risks, particularly risks pertaining to termination, but risks pertaining to political risk, force majeure, those risks where you would want probably assurance that the government is behind you. So the government project support agreement covers those risks. So what you may need to do then, if you, for now, in the first round, the government awarded this agreement to 10 projects as a pilot set. They will monitor what happens with these 10 projects. If the 10 projects are a success, they will then open a second phase, modified, improved, or in its current form, where more projects can then come in, because then they will have been a track record and a proof of concept that the approach works. So you could also consider that, although currently, like I mentioned, the first phase, the first window has been closed. So you can consider going to the next, waiting for the next window. Procurement options, I think these ones I've already explained in a previous slide, where you can still sell directly to ZETDC. You can go directly to the customers. You can do embedded generators, or you can, if you do get a client and you do want to put up a project for a specific client, and the client, especially mines, have large tracts of land, you can actually engage the client and put up a project on site. So you have an embedded generator that minimizes the risk that you have, or even the cost of your project, moving the power through the ZETDC grid. I will not talk about the costs really at this forum, but if you need more engagement in terms of what the costs are like moving power through the ZETDC grid, we can talk about that offline. You can also sell your power to retail licensees. You can also actually, as a group of IPPs, just aggregate your power and look for customers for your power. The renewable energy policy looks at, for now, it is all unsolicited bids, in particular for government projects. It's all unsolicited bids, and evidently it is not very efficient. So what the renewable energy policy is proposing is to have competitive bidding for renewable energy projects. Very soon, the government promises us this will be a reality, that bidding will be competitive. Improved regulatory frameworks, this really refers to standardization of agreements. Right now, You come in, you have to start negotiating even grid access. You require to go to ZTTDC and negotiate grid access. The regulator is there just to monitor and see what is happening. But I personally think the regulator should take more charge on this and give clear guidance where investors just come in and pick a template, see if it suits themselves, and then they take it and sign it. That also helps standardize the sector. I'll leave it at this point, Jeo, and hand this back to you for your moderation.
Thank you very much, Lion. That was a wonderful presentation. Okay, I think we are done with the presentations. I think maybe we could, as the slide says, say thank you and discussion. We could have a discussion and go through the other questions that were posted in the chat and the Q&A as we look to wrap up on our webinar. So perhaps we could start with this one, which is kind of addressed to all the panelists. Say, would the panelists please comment on the need of developing a regional IRP that is to include all the SADC countries? What would be your comment, Lion? Perhaps Chris?
Let me go first, then Chris can come in. My view is really that we have a lot of inefficiencies. I didn't mention during the presentation that whilst more than half the countries in SADC are load shedding today, there are countries in SADC that have surplus. And that on its own tells you the need of an integrated resource plan for the region. Angola, for instance, has huge surplus power that it has, but it is surrounded by countries that are all load shedding. What more evidence do we need? If you then look at also at even the cost of the projects, Professor Mtale was talking about the commercial or economic order of execution of the projects that we can have. We still have situations where, and there's been a lot of debate in the chat also about what is expensive, how much is wind, how much is renewable energy versus the old thermal, and all this is happening. And in some pockets of the region, we are investing in very expensive sources, while in the other pocket, there are sources that are not yet tapped into that are much cheaper. So that is huge case for an integrated resource plan for the region. However, the challenge that I see that has bedeviled us in the past is within the transmission space. To begin with, it is only recent that a number of countries are opening transmission space or its transmission investment space to private sector. When it was within government utilities, the government of Zambia or the government of Zimbabwe, the national utilities of Zimbabwe, would find it difficult to go and invest in a line that is in the DRC as an example, simply because that line will eventually help Zimbabwe. It wouldn't work. It would not make a business case. It would not even sail through. But private sector, it's much easier for private sector in Zimbabwe to go and put up a line in the DRC so that power can come down. And the other thing is also that transmission alone, up to this point, transmission costs have not been cost reflective. So if you were to do a business that is just based on putting up a transmission line, the wheeling rates in SAP do not allow you to recover your costs. But glad to suffice that SAP is moving in the direction where the transaction, the wheeling or use of system costs will be sufficient to make transmission projects bankable. When that does happen, then it will be much easier for private sector even to come in, and even governments to put in additional lines that are not necessarily coming in to facilitate their own consumption, but even as a business, I think I'll leave Chris to respond as well.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I think one thing I must say, having looked at the draft IRP 2024 in South Africa and attended the public hearings, I think you'll be disappointed to know that there is nothing in there about importing and exporting of power. So it doesn't come into the planning framework of the South African IRP, which is disappointing, but I think it's a reflection of the very large size of the South African electricity sector in comparison to its neighbors. The weak interconnects between South Africa and its neighbors, and the fact that we have experienced power shortages for a number of years. It seems to, be easing at the moment, but we're still coming out of an environment of significant power shortages. I hear regularly in the media and on the radio and TV, people saying, why are we exporting to Namibia or to Zimbabwe or to Zambia or to other countries where, when we have shortages in South Africa? I have to remind them, that we are an importer of electricity from our neighbors, like Mozambique, for example, from the Cahora Bassa scheme of green, reliable power. And that we are a regional economy, and that regional trading does take place on the South African power pool, where surpluses and shortages are traded, and everybody benefits. I'm a strong believer in the regional economy, and that what is good for South Africa is good for our neighbors and vice versa, and that we should cooperate regionally in the electricity space. But it's not a popular subject. There's a lot of nationalism. Energy nationalism, is the order of the day sometimes, certainly by people that are so informed about the benefits of regional trading. But the reality in the end is that the trading is also limited by the weak interconnects between the countries and the dominance of South Africa's energy demand, and the fact that we have had shortages for a number of years, and that is kind of putting the brakes on the regional economy, I think. Thank you.
Okay, maybe I can weigh in a little bit on this issue. I mean, the Zambian IRP did, in fact, recognize the presence of SAP and the Eastern African Power Pool, and the need to obviously support projects that are proposed within the SAP framework. So to some extent, you can say we do have, if you like, at least a starting point, in the sense that SAP does, in fact, plan at a regional level. But to Chris's point, and I've heard this in several discussions, even with SAP, most of the countries within the SAP region tend to plan for a surplus, right? In other words, everybody wanting to export to everybody else. Even for ourselves, when we look at our IRP, what we've included in there, when we've sorted out all our short-term challenges with respect to the drought and load shedding and so on, the plan is to be able to have surplus to export, which makes interconnections a little challenging in terms of financial justification of how do you actually get interconnectors going. And there have been lots of these interconnectors that haven't taken off yet. And I wonder whether that could be because it's always difficult to justify interconnections when you talk about, you talk about the wheeling charges being low. So the number of issues that need to be solved there. But as a whole, I'm in support of understanding which resources are there in the region in order for us to obviously access, hopefully, the least cost resources in the region. take into account, of course, the need for transmission. But we need to really go over this nationalistic approach to planning. I think that we still have that as a major challenge originally. But we can use the current platform of SAP as a starting point. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Professor. Lion, perhaps before we proceed, there's a question here, more of like a comment from Charles Gutu. It says it's been his experience in Zimbabwe that investors are reluctant to invest if IPP does not have a GIA or government concession, and yet the government will not issue a GIA if one has not got an investor in place. And he says it's kind of a chicken and egg situation there. Lion, what would be your comment?
Thanks, Joe. That's true. It's a chicken and egg. But I think what the government is saying is that a project may not just go direct to government and ask for a GIA and not indicate who their investors or potential investors are. So my suggestion would be probably this is subject to further conversations within the IPP space. What the government is saying is let the investors give you an expression of interest and indicate to you what their terms are. The government naturally, also from a political perspective, they would want to know who wants to come into this country. So you need to be able to point to them who that person is going to be. Then from that point onwards, they will be able to process the GIA. But I hear Gutu's point. It's sort of a chicken and egg. But the projects that I have seen explained, they've even been explained with partners who just have expressed interest, but are not necessarily have not necessarily started releasing their funding.
Yeah, thanks. I think that is pretty clear. Chris, I saw there's a question you said you'd like to respond to live. When can the findings and studies around the interconnectors be finished?
Yeah, I can't really give you an answer myself on that. I suppose I will need to interact with the so-called National Transmission Company of South Africa on that subject. I really am not close to the detailed planning in that regard, but I have seen on the in the audience people in the group, listening in. Ronald Murray is on the line apparently, unless he's left in the interim. But maybe he could come in and say a few words on this at this point, because he's very close to the strategic planning issues at the National Transmission Company of South Africa. So sorry that I'm going to have to pass the buck on this one.
Right.
Maybe Ronald could put up his hand if he wants to say anything. Not sure.
You said Ronald who? Actually, I didn't catch
Ronald
that.
Ronald Murray from Eskom, or shall we say
okay.
from the National Company of South Africa. Ronald Murray.
I think he's online. I sort of put him on the spot.
Sorry, Ronald.
Hi, Ronald.
Yeah, maybe he's otherwise occupied. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it could be. Well, I think we we've actually run out of time. Well, I think maybe we could conclude with some comments, and if Ronald is able to come in, he can add his comments as well. Seems as he is still having
Hello.
Oh, hi, Ronald.
Hi. Yeah. Sorry, I had difficulty unmuting there. Yeah.
I'm
With
not sure if you've
regards
been.
to the
Okay.
the question on interconnectors,
Mhm.
I think interconnectors have been a challenge in the region for a number of years, and mainly for the reasons that have been indicated. It's really about price differentials between the areas, and the lines really are motivated by the ability to reduce the cost for any of the regions, but with prices that are not cost reflective as well. This adds challenges to the motivation of the projects. But there is work that is undergoing with various countries to have a look at how to motivate these. And there are a lot of studies that are still, I would say, valid to a large extent to for the interconnectors like the ones mentioned, the Musisa and so forth. But the real challenging part is the ability to who's financing the project and who's benefiting from it. And perhaps I think one of the one of the future motivations will be is that with renewables, there will be excess, and the excess if you don't diversify that excess, it will add a burden of cost to the area that has the excess as well. And so at some point when all the different areas will increase their renewable content, there will be a need to curtail for system conditions. And at some stage, that volume of curtailment is likely to be able to motivate for the differential between areas to build these transmission networks.
Right, thank you so much, Ronald. That is, Chris, would you like to add a comment?
No, I think that's, thank you, Ronald. Sorry to put you on a spot, and thank you for coming in with your insights. But I don't really have sight on the status or the progress or the timing of these interconnects. But I think Ronald has enunciated the challenges clearly. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thanks, Ronald, again. I think, seeing as we have already run out of time, perhaps we could just have a few closing remarks and we could wrap up this session. Of course, the presentation will be made available to our participants and the recording as well. So I'll let Lion give his final comments, and then we can go to Professor Joseph and then Chris as well. Unfortunately, Mr. Mutota has had to drop off earlier, and so for the other questions, I believe you can still reach out to him bilaterally, as he mentioned. I'll try and throw his email in the chat. And Lion, over to you. Lion, are you still there? Or now your mic is
sorry,
on mute.
I was talking to myself. Sorry. I was just commenting on the work that is being done by ECA on the Continental Master Plan. It is a beautiful idea to connect the whole of Africa so that the price efficiencies can actually be derived across the whole continent. And it will require a significant mind shift for us all, the national utilities, the governments, to then be able to look at this and embrace it as a way of improving our economies and our power supplies and our reliabilities of our grids. Somebody also closed by referring to a question somebody threw onto the chat there about the IPP. He says, as an IPP, there's very limited the work that I can do to access the grid. If the lines are not there, I'm stuck where I want to put my transmission line. That's the work of the national grid or other investors to come in there. true to some extent, but also it may be necessary at this stage for IPPs to look at their projects from a much broader perspective in terms of business scope, and collaborate with ITCs, independent transmission companies that want to build in lines. I know for sure in Zimbabwe, if you want to put in a line, or you want a line to be put in to evacuate your power, the national utility will, that's their responsibility, but they will tell you we don't have the money to align with your project timelines. If you want it aligned with your project timelines, you look for the money yourself, put the line, and we'll pay you back through the tariff. So these are some of the provisions that are really being done, but that leaves the IPP in a space where they are not able to extricate themselves from the pressure that comes from grid constraints. But my take and hope is that going forward, there is going to be more scope and space for private sector in transmission lines. When that does happen, which we should push for, then we will be able to put our power stations in the right places at minimum costs and push power into the grid. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you so much, Lion. Professor?
Yeah, just very briefly. First of all, I think this is a very useful forum to get to understand what's going on in different parts of our region regarding power development. For me, the key takeaway is that we need to pay particular attention to the bankability of projects, to create an environment where you give confidence to the private sector that investing in this region or in this country, you will not go to lose your money, and you've got a fair way of allocating risks in this investment process. In the case of Zambia, there are many IPPs that are interested to come. I believe that in terms of the pipeline, you probably have more than 5,000 megawatts of interested developers. But in order to move forward, you absolutely need to address the financial issues to do with the sector. And I hope that that's something that we can fix shortly, finding ways and mechanisms to deal with that, especially in an environment where government, in the case of Zambia, is no longer able to provide sovereign guarantees. So other mechanisms are needed to make sure that we can go over this hurdle of financial viability of projects. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor. Chris, any last comments, closing remarks?
Thank you. I can only but agree with the closing remarks that have been made by the previous two presenters. And we're seeing, across the region, whether it's South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, I'm sure Botswana and Mozambique, the situations are similar, that the sovereign, the government, has limited space to provide sovereign guarantees. The utilities themselves have weak balance sheets and cannot fund not only generation projects, but also transmission projects without significant private sector support. So everybody's exploring the way in which the private sector can become further involved in the electricity generation, transmission, and even the distribution sector. And I think we just have to face these issues and enable it through reducing red tape, by allowing these things to happen quicker, and to harness the energy of the private sector, and overcome our ideological background. Sometimes the issues are ideological, but when push comes to shove, when the cupboard is bare, ideology gets put aside, and pragmatism and doing the things that work and make things happen become the order of the day. And I think we're reaching that stage, and a lot of exciting developments have been spoken about by presenters. And every one of the presenters that I've heard today including, and messages from myself is that the role of the private sector and public-private partnerships in generation, transmission, and distribution are the order of the day, and should be welcomed with open arms, and that the private sector should be seen as a partner in this process and not treated with hostility, but should be embraced, that we all have the same goals in the end, that is to get a fair return on equity and serve the countries of the region that we live in and that we thrive in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you to all our presenters. This has been very informative and very engaging, and I hope it has been of value to all our